Welcome back, Bantwana Benkosi. This is Power Talk with me, Mbuyiseni Ndlozi. We're going to talk today about the world of organized crime. Very important. And try to move from the world and zoom into our country. In the first hour, we're going to paint with experts the true picture of organized crime across the world. And we are joined by Mark Shaw, Director of Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime. Welcome to Power Talk, Mark.
Thank you, Mbuyiseni. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you very much for making time. And here in studio, a crime expert and organized crime investigator from IRS Forensic Investigations, Chad Thomas.
Thank you so much for the invitation.
Thank you. Thank you for making time. Is it Chad or Chad?
Either or, Chad.
Chad, okay. Because, there's a country called Chad. So I'm going to start with you, Mark, and for the benefit of our listeners, and I think that we can underestimate some of these concepts, but if you could just break down first and foremost, what is organized crime, and give us a basic summary of its global articulation.
Not to get into the weeds, but there's been a long debate about what is actually meant by organized crime. And just to illustrate that, the UN has never been able to define the term organized crime. There's a UN Convention Against Organized Crime, of which South Africa is also a party. But in those negotiations, actually, countries couldn't reach an agreement. What they could reach an agreement on was what is an organized crime group, and that is three or more people acting in over a period of time to commit serious offenses. So it's a very general term, and as a sort of someone reviewing what had been negotiated, it's sort of like pornography. You'll know it when you see it. Generally, what we in our work define as organized crime is a group engaged in an illicit market around which there's additional definitional problems, but an illicit or grey market acting over time, often using corruption or violence. And you would generally be engaged in three types of activities. And I was listening to your news broadcast. The first is one, not necessarily all at the same time. The first is protection, so mafia-style protection, extortion, which has become, as you know, very common in South Africa. Secondly, the trade or trafficking in an illicit good. And thirdly, the sourcing of illicit products. You can engage in other activities, but generally that would be the case. And the reality is that what we term by organized crime or organized crime group encompasses an enormous amount of structures, from criminal networks to what we call syndicates in the South African context, the Western Cape gangs, et cetera, et cetera. We ourselves in the Global Initiative categorize criminal groups into mafia-style groups. So this is protection-style economies, generally named criminal groups, private sector actors, foreign actors, state-embedded actors, criminal networks. So basically the point is that there's an enormous plethora of what we are talking about. Mm-hmm. What does the global picture look like? I think it's important to
before we go to the global picture.
Sure, absolutely.
What we are tracking when we speak about organized crime, so that when we speak to the global picture, we know exactly what we are tracking. Maybe define it negatively. What is likely not to be defined as organized crime?
Good question. I think if you, Chad, and I do one bank robbery, and then we break up our group and are no longer involved, even if it's a relatively big bank robbery, under the strict definition, that wouldn't be organized crime. If the three of us do 3 or 4 bank robberies and we need someone to help us launder the money, we would have entered the realm of organized crime. there's a lot of grays in the discussion, Mbuyiseni. I mean, I think that's
something
an important
like,
point to get across.
And I'm going to see, we're going to possibly see this when we get into it. I mean, a thing that is mostly associated, and Chad can maybe contribute with this definitional conceptual problem. But it seems to me that crimes like murder, if it is related to like those shebeen brawls, because one of the big crime measures that South Africa is associated with is that it has a high level of murder rate in the world, some of the highest in the world. We are not speaking about that type of murder on the one hand. On the other, your sort of rape, like incest, like statutory rape and all of that, or these pickpocketers in downtown. It seems to me that is not in the realm of organized crime.
So let's break down some of those things you just mentioned. Let's talk about murder. If somebody gets murdered in a place of entertainment like a tavern or a shebeen, it's not an organized crime. But when you talk about murder for hire, where you've got Izinkabi traveling up from KZN to take out businessmen, and that's their business, to arrange stolen vehicles, to arrange firearms, to arrange getaway vehicles, and their business is to kill people, it becomes organized crime.
The idea is that you must be organized into an organization.
So let's take it further. Let's
Over time.
Yeah.
So you gave the example.
Over time, I think, is important. Yeah.
You gave the example of rape. If a woman gets raped on her way home, it wasn't planned. It was an opportunistic crime. But if you are trafficking in persons for sexploitation, and those women over a period of time are being raped because it's a syndicate crime, and there's money laundering involved, there's illegal transportation of human beings, it becomes an organized crime. Let's talk about something common. Somebody's walking along Jan Smuts Avenue, they get robbed of their cell phone. That is not an organized crime. But when people sit together and plan to bomb ATMs or they plan to rob CITs, it becomes an organized crime because this is the nature of their business. This is what they do. This is what they plan for.
Okay, I'm going to be, and this is the last sort of caveat. With the age of digital technologies, and I mean, what AI is doing is super interesting in this case. If I'm sitting somewhere as an intelligent, hacker, or I know IT, and I'm able to get organized but artificial intelligent programs to rob people on a large scale. If I'm alone, but the idea, the way it appears because of digital technologies, specifically artificial intelligence, would that fall outside of the realm of organized crime?
I don't think so. It depends on the number of people involved. It depends on the sophistication of the crime. It depends on how they launder. Let's take, for example, the couple that were arrested in Johannesburg recently, one of the biggest child porn groups taken down in the world. They, as a couple, had set up money laundering. They had set up servers around the world. And there's other people that are involved with them. The state may very well consider, in terms of our legislation that defines organized crime in South Africa, which we refer to colloquially as POCA, which is the Prevention of Organized Crime Act, they may determine that they're going to issue a racketeering certificate in respect of that crime because there's money laundering, because there's child exploitation, because it's cross-border. So it comes down sometimes to the merits of the crime. That's why Mark mentioned there's a lot of gray areas. So child pornography wouldn't normally be seen as an organized crime, but when you're talking about an international syndicate that are sharing terabytes of information worldwide, it takes on a whole different standpoint. It's organized, and also the sanctions for organized crime, if a racketeering certificate is issued, are far more severe than for a normal crime that you may be charged for.
I see. Okay, Mark, I mean, the idea then from the 2023 Global Organized Crime Index is that 83% of the world population is living in conditions of high criminality. And this is where then I'd like you to break down for us the state of organized crime in the world.
Firstly, when we say 82%, that's because a a set of countries with very large populations have high levels of criminality. So that's around 75 countries, and then 118 countries with lower populations have or suffer lower levels of organized criminality. But the reality is that the vast majority of the world's citizens, in different ways and to different levels, daily come into contact with some form of organized criminality, and that index measures 15 markets and a range of criminal actor types. Importantly, when I think people's view is generally that what organized crime is sort of what they see in the movie, the sort of three types of the Italian mafia, the Yakuza in Japan. In a way, that has changed dramatically over the last number of decades. And what we see now, hence the definitional problems. And I should add to the definitional debate, the conceptual debate, is that some people think the term organized crime is frankly useless now. It doesn't encapsulate the complexity of what we're dealing with. Is that we have, since the end of the Cold War and then the turn of the millennium and COVID, I think these are three very important markers in the debate globally, not only in South Africa, although they apply very well in South Africa too. An expansion, a dramatic expansion of criminal markets and organized crime, whether that's Latin American drug trafficking, whether that's cybercrime, which you've mentioned, whether it's trafficking in human beings. More recently, the growth of fraud, which on the index is now, and your question is very pertinent, on the index is now the most common type of criminality, or organized criminality globally, fraud. So individual fraud that you may get on your cell phone or the like. On our measures, and it's quite a sophisticated process to get that across all countries in the world, that's now the most common organized crime, followed by human trafficking and then a range of others which I can go through. None of them would surprise you. Drugs are, of course, in that mix, and drugs have long been a mainstay of organized crime, also in South Africa. But drugs are only one part of a very diverse set of criminal activities that.
And what is the top drug?
The world.
What is the top drug in the world? Is it still heroin, I think?
No, it's cannabis, actually. But of course, cannabis. The debate on cannabis also in South Africa is changing rapidly, so it's quite hard to measure. But generally, I'll measure on the presence of criminal networks trading in cannabis. I'm, for the moment, not getting into the drug legalization debate, just on the pure. If something is illegal, then criminal groups, there are incentives to draw profit from it. So cannabis is the most common, followed by synthetic drugs. Synthetic drugs are now a huge issue globally, also in South Africa. TIC is a classic example of that, methamphetamine, followed by cocaine, followed by heroin, followed by cocaine. So we measure those four separately in the index.
I see. What is synthetic drugs?
So synthetic drugs.
Go for it, Chad.
Sorry, Mark. Synthetic drugs are manufactured drugs. They're made in a laboratory. So cannabis is not synthetic. Cocaine, to an extent, is not synthetic, although they add stuff to cocaine. Heroin is grown from the poppy leaf. Cocaine comes from the cocoa leaf. Cannabis, like we know, comes from the marijuana leaf. So that is not manufactured in a lab, although they are now using hydroponics on marijuana. We know that heroin and cocaine are now being cut with fentanyl to make it more addictive, to change the type of the high. But when you look at things like methamphetamines, when you look at LSD, when you look at ecstasy, those are lab drugs. Those are manufactured. Ketamine.
Where does alcohol fit in here?
Alcohol, for me, is one of the biggest causes of crime. And in my opinion,
alcohol trafficking, we have instances of labs that are manufacturing alcohol that is not legal, so to speak. I mean, there was a bust of some lab in the West End a couple of weeks ago. Is it part of drug trafficking?
So, Mark, I apologize. It's not that I'm interrupting. It's because our lovely host looks at me when he asks these questions. So I'm imagining he's wanting me to answer. So please don't think I'm trying to interrupt.
I'll try to manage that. Okay, I got you.
Illicit alcohol is a massive problem. It's not manufactured in the best environment. It's not alcohol fit for human consumption. It's diluted, it's dyed, it's flavored ethanol. You can go blind, you can die. And we've seen a lot of people, because of South Africa's alcohol culture, getting involved in illicit alcohol manufacture, just like we saw a boom in illicit tobacco manufacture. So it's a massive problem. But for me, there's a number of problems associated with alcohol that is very similar to an addictive drug like crack cocaine or another drug like methamphetamines or tic, is that when you're under the influence of it, you commit crime. You commit violent contact crime, or you start committing crimes to support that habit.
Or you get in a car and think you can be Schumacher.
There you go.
Yeah. But Mark, what is the global state in relation to like illicit alcohol trafficking? Is it a South African thing, or is it also a big international phenomena?
It's not the two, let's call them commodities, which are very common for organized crime groups, are tobacco, so cigarettes, and alcohol. And basically what this means is that there's a number of layers to these markets, but essentially either the products are legal but heavily taxed, so there's incentives to engage in a black market, or as Chad has outlined, you produce cigarettes or alcohol illegally in order to make profit. And in fact, I'm writing a history of organized crime in South Africa, and I've been amazed at the degree to which alcohol shaped the nature of organized crime in Africa, because it wasn't for sale for African people. So a black market developed over time, and it shaped over time the nature of how criminal enterprise evolved in the country. In North Africa, in countries where alcohol may be banned, of course, there's black markets too, which are run by criminal networks and the like. So yes, it is there. And the great story which is used a lot in research about the incentives for organized crime is prohibition in the US in the 1930s. Alcohol, as you recall, was banned. The mafia grew on steroids in that period by extracting profits from moving illegal alcohol to speakeasies, etc., around New York, and it led to a lot of violence. So, and then alcohol was unbanned. Organized crime had extracted profits from that, continued to engage in black market alcohol movement, but at much lower levels of profit, because it, of course, was then legal.
All right, yeah. Sorry for that interruption. So you were outlining others, migrant smuggling, human trafficking, I suppose?
Yep. All of those, on our measures, human trafficking is the fastest growing organized crime market globally. That's, of course, people paying smugglers, very sophisticated smuggling mechanisms to move people. Human trafficking is just after fraud. Environmental crime, either of wildlife or of forestry products, which is growing rapidly. So the devastation of forests in the Amazon, in Central Africa. You know, the reality is that global illicit markets have grown extraordinarily in the context of globalization. I think the big question is whether the sort of imposition of tariffs, to some degree, the slowing down of the global economy, will slow that. My own sense is that it won't, that in reality, criminal groups have a lot of capital. They have established mechanisms of moving things. There are very, very strong incentives to move commodities. And in the gray area, we talked a lot about the concept of organized crime. In some of these markets, take forestry products, actually what you have is companies acting illegally. So registered companies acting illegally. At least in our definition, they would still fulfill the idea of organized crime. Countries in the index that do very badly, South Africa is one of them, are generally, there's a weighting in the index, a kind of natural weighting to countries which have a very large diversity of markets. So if you're doing badly, or if you have the resources where you are doing badly across all 15 markets that you measure, Brazil is a very good example, Colombia, Mexico, Nigeria, you then do badly in the index. So not all countries are created equally. Haiti, we have an observatory in Haiti. It's basically controlled essentially by gangs, as you will have read in the news. That does less badly in the index because it doesn't have the diversity of criminal markets. It has guns, drugs, extortion, for example.
Yeah.
So that's how to read the index.
If you've just joined us, this is Power Talk with me, Mbuyiseni Ndlozi. We are speaking about the state of organized crime in the world. And we've got very important experts here with us. We're going to take the headlines. The time is 10:30 with Nyaka Lotifo and continue the conversation after the break. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Power Talk with me, Mbuyiseni Ndlozi. We are speaking about the state of organized crime globally with Mark Shaw, the director of Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime, and Chad Thomas, crime expert, ground force, and organized crime investigator for IRS Forensic Investigations. Mark, I'm going to be back at you. Firstly, the criminality score, if you could take us through that criminality score, and then the countries, maybe the top 10 in the world. Yeah.
The criminality score is essentially a combination of 15 criminal markets, some of which I've mentioned. Mm-hmm. None of them would surprise your listeners, plus our ratings of the criminal actor categories. Just to describe it, that's hundreds of experts working over a period of 2 years to draw that together. And it really boils down to a rating out of 10. The issue on both criminality and also then on states' capacity to respond, so what we term the state's resilience capacity. If you look at the top 10 countries, the country we rate as worst in the world is Myanmar in Southeast Asia. Just to say that a lot of countries in conflict have this criteria. It's got a lot of armed groups, criminal style activities. It's a source of drug trafficking. It's a huge source of fraud. I know we're going to talk about that later. There are sort of compounds where people are engaged in global fraud, drugs, etc. So that has the highest rating of just over 8.15. That's followed by Colombia, long history of drug trafficking, cartels which have fragmented, a long period of conflict also, a large number of other criminal activity, whether it's gold mining or environmental crime. That's followed, I think no one will be surprised, by Mexico. Again, a very diverse set of criminal activity, high level of migrant smuggling, drugs, etc. That's at 757. And I'll go through Paraguay next. The DRC, simply given its size, is next, so one close to South Africa. Nigeria, then South Africa. So South Africa is in the top 10. Then Iraq, Afghanistan, Lebanon, Ecuador, Syria, Honduras. That's more or less the
countries
the
you're
10.
describing. I mean, with the exception, of course, we can talk to the Nigerian question in a moment.
Yeah.
Firstly, have dramatic, long histories of organized crime. They are basically states, criminal states, on the one hand, or they are in a conflict. Syria, Myanmar, these are places that just came out of conflict or where there is actual conflict. The DRC and all of that. South Africa is seemingly it's lost in this situation.
Yeah, it's an interesting point you raise. I would say South Africa, and there's another measure which I haven't given, I mentioned it, the resilience measure, because South Africa fits in a group of countries, Kenya's there, Italy is there also, which have relatively high resilience to organized crime, so the capacity of the state to respond, a free media, etc., but also high levels of criminality. South Africa has a very diverse set of criminal markets. It has a very violent, when Chad was speaking and we were talking about the tavern massacre, a tavern massacre could be related to organized crime if it's related, of course, to extortion. South Africa has more or less double the homicide rate of Mexico. So there are a number of issues in the South African framework. Of course, not all South African homicides are linked to organized crime, and it's a real challenge to be able to come up with a number. Various research estimates are made. 1/4, 1/3 are linked in some way to gangs or organized crime, but we don't really have particularly good information that allows us to tie every homicide.
And
My
then,
point would simply be, last point is South Africa fits there simply because of its, diversity of criminal markets and diversity of criminal actors, including foreign actors and state-embedded actors, what we term as actors in the state engaging in criminal activity or protecting criminal activity.
we're going to go into that because that's my sense. The resilience that you pointed to earlier means that there is more complicity from us than the fact that the state has an incapacity. Am I correct?
That's
Because with
that's
something
true.
like the DRC, it's very hardly a state. I mean, large parts of the country, there is no police, there are no police stations, there are no investigators, and then there's a lot of mineral resources which are ran by, mining international giants that rely on private security, blah, blah, blah. Very big area of self-control, so to speak. And that could be said as well about other places like the Niger Delta. The Nigerian state is not as wide, but in South Africa, the state is everywhere.
Yes, that's true. I think that's a fair point to make. Generally, however, the South African state-embedded actor rating is high, but it is not as high as, for example, Venezuela or a number of other countries, but it's certainly in the top portion. So I think your hypothesis is accurate. Where South Africa does sit, and I think this is an important point to make, it sits in a set of countries, an unusual set of countries in some ways, which have high levels of organized crime, but comparatively high resilience to organized crime. And Colombia is there also. The Colombian state is still quite strong, despite the fact that there are parts of the country where the state doesn't have penetration. The South African state arguably is still quite strong, despite the fact that it has been weakened or eroded by corruption. So I think that's what we are trying to reach in our measures of state capacity.
And then what are the top, in terms of the categories you were speaking to: drug trafficking, migrant smuggling, human trafficking, money laundering, firearms trafficking, illegal gambling, extortion, creating and selling of counterfeit goods, wildlife and cultural property smuggling, cybercrime. What are the tops in the world? What is the measure? I mean, what is the world mostly buttressed by?
We, on our latest measures, which is a new measure of fraud, as I mentioned earlier, so the most widely spread crime globally linked to organized criminality is now fraud. And I'm sure your listeners, from cell phone interventions, etc., and that's related to developments in Southeast Asia, so-called scam compounds, where people, literally thousands of people, are locked away engaging in scams, as well as developments around Nigeria, West Africa, etc. So there's post-COVID, there's been a growth of organized fraud generally. It really has skyrocketed. Followed by human trafficking. So we've mentioned that, followed by cannabis, which we've had a brief discussion about, followed by arms trafficking, very significant. The degree, this is no a stranger to the South African environment, the degree to which there are illicit markets in firearms, followed by human smuggling, which I said has the biggest increase, counterfeit goods, synthetic drugs, fauna, animals, wildlife, cocaine, non-renewables, that's oil and mining, so some of what you were talking about for the DRC. Then cyber-dependent crimes, so the most, exploitation of children on the internet is an example. So these are crimes that rely on computers, on cyber phenomena. Then heroin, then forestry or flora, then extortion and protection racketeering. That's sort of the global list. It looks very different for every country, but that's the global list.
Chada, what's your take on this resilience of the state on the one hand, and yet you are also rating high on the fact of the diversity and the capacity of organized criminals to thrive.
You raised a very valid point earlier when you compare South Africa in the top 10 to the other countries. Some of those countries are at war. Some of those countries are sparsely populated. Some of those countries don't have evidence of state intervention in vast rural areas. And you mentioned specifically DRC. South Africa, we have the added complication of complicity between bad actors in the private sector and bad actors in the public sector. We also have a problem where South Africans have become very desensitized to crime. It becomes a talking point where if you have a home invasion, they say, was somebody raped? No. Oh, well, thank God. Was somebody murdered? No. Oh, well, thank you. Thank goodness that didn't happen. And you move on with the conversation. Anywhere else in the world there's a home invasion, it's like a huge thing. In South Africa, because it wasn't a violent home invasion that led to a death or a rape, it's like almost all right. When we talk about crime in South Africa, how inherent it's become and how these syndicates are using South Africa as a playground, we've become number one in Africa for kidnapping. That is most definitely an organized crime. If you look at the planning, the intelligence behind it, if you look at how the modus operandi has developed over the years.
But how could something like that be the highest in the most organized country in the continent? I mean, it means our police are the ones that are possibly giving us away. Maybe some officials in the state apparatuses, because if you've got the systems and yet people are getting kidnapped, it's complicity.
So we moved from number 6 in the world to number 5 in the world for kidnapping. We're number 1 on the continent for kidnapping. A lot of our kidnapping was imported from Maputo. Maputo had a high rate of kidnapping, targeting specific communities. When it came to South Africa, it targeted cash-rich communities, people that are involved in business that has a lot of cash, such as cash and carry, butcher shops, liquor stores, etc. So you saw the Muslim community being targeted. You saw the Portuguese community being targeted. And these are communities that are also very close-knit. So if you're asking for 100 million rand ransom, these communities can raise that type of money.
Yeah.
So South Africa has become a destination point for these kidnapping syndicates. A lot of them are linked to Pakistan. A lot of them are linked to Mozambique. Some of the monies, we believe, have gone to organizations such as ISIS and others. So it's very perturbing. But what's become more perturbing is the fact that because we read about these high levels of kidnapping with these huge amounts of ransom involved, so we call that kidnap for ransom, we now have opportunistic criminals getting in on it. You now have what's called express kidnappings taking place, where they hold you for a short time to empty your cash via your phone using your biometrics. We have people in informal settlements being kidnapped for 500 rand, people in suburbia being kidnapped for a couple of 100,000 rand, and then high-profile cases that run into the hundreds of millions, a lot of which don't get reported. So it's become a very, very fruitful operation by these organized crime syndicates.
And you bring it down to the fact that we've been sort of desensitized to crime. I'm canvassing a point here about state complicity. I can see kidnapping, like, you know, the story, for instance, of those kids in a school in Nigeria. I mean, you kidnap 200 girls all at once. I mean, that's just the fact that you don't actually have a government, and be able to move them and hold them somewhere in a situation where you've got police stations, you've got police patrolling, you've got JMPD, you've got cameras. I mean, Johannesburg has got cameras everywhere in the streets with Vuma Cam and all of that. In a situation like that, how do you become number one?
So to your point, when you look at the kidnapping of 200 schoolgirls in Nigeria, it's a rural area.
Yes.
It doesn't have the state infrastructure. It's an organization, Boko Haram. You also see men in the Nigeria Delta also involved in extortion, involved in trafficking of fuel that's obtained in an illicit manner. But coming back to the kidnapping in South Africa, there have been arrests made where there's been policemen involved, but it's policemen that are now arresting their own. You have the anti-kidnapping task team, which was established by crime intelligence. Crime intelligence hasn't had the best reputation the past decade or so. They've been used to settle petty squabbles. They've been used for political influence. But you see a unit getting set up by the National Office of Crime Intelligence, specifically looking at anti-kidnapping, And they've been successful. And if you can replicate these kind of units, you'll be able to most probably reduce the level of crime. But complicity from the state, and in particular from the South African Police Services, is a concern. When you look at IPID, they don't have enough members. They get 5,000 new investigations a year. They're 15,000 investigations behind. When you look at Gauteng Anti-Corruption Unit of the Hawks, for example, they've got most probably at any given time 10 members that are expected to investigate corrupt police officers, traffic officials, metro police officials, government officials that are involved in tender fraud, as well as any other crime that's perceived as corruption. How can you have 10 members in the economic hub of South Africa, if not Africa, investigating corruption? So you will find that there are bad actors within the police, but you're also going to find there's a lot of good actors who are trying to bring down those bad actors.
Mark, United Arab Emirates, very important because, now that's where Dubai is. Can you address me about that, their criminality score? Because it has become a huge destination as far as I'm concerned for some of these transnational organized crime groups.
Yeah, Mbuyiseni, the UAE is a very interesting phenomena for a couple of reasons. One is that, of course, criminals, it is known, criminals around the world, European criminals, Irish criminals, Western European, Balkan, and others have found a home there. I think the kind of subtle agreement is that as long as they don't cause disruption and bring their money, there's very high levels of surveillance in the UAE. They can carry on with what they're doing. There's also very strong evidence. For example, 80% of illicit gold trafficking finds its way to the Gulf. So that's one of the reasons for the relatively high score in the UAE plus synthetic drugs plus others. So it's the global criminal economy runs from very flashy places to places where there's a lot of harm. And all of these places are connected. And to make the point that people may be killed in a Mexican village, but the profits are extracted elsewhere. And so the sort of harm in a local community is linked to wealth elsewhere. And I think this is how to see what has happened globally. We haven't talked about the movement of money, the enormous movement of illicit profits around the world. And I would make the argument that the UAE is part of that.
Peru declares a state of emergency. Firstly, what is its score, and do initiatives like a state of emergency sort of achieve the dismantling and reduction of organized crime?
Mbuyiseni, I didn't hear the country name. I know Sierra Leone declared a state of emergency on drug trafficking, but I didn't hear the country name.
Peru. The president of Peru, yes,
Peru
on March 18th, yes.
I think there's an argument and this is similar to the debate now currently happening in North America and to some degree in Europe around declaring organized crime groups as terrorist entities or terrorist groups. So it's basically bringing in all the resources of the state to bear against them. South Africa, this is not unusual. Well, I don't want to say unusual, but South Africa itself has deployed the military in the Cape Flats, in the areas west of Johannesburg. So what a state of emergency. In the Cape Flats 2019, the military was deployed when there was very strong fighting between gangs. That's a kind of clash between organized crime groups of a drug trafficking. So a state of emergency is a mechanism in which the state can bring all the resources it has to bear. I think in the short term, it's a useful way to stabilize things. I think this is some of the crux of the discussion happening in the broader policy community around responses. If you look at the El Salvador example, basically what the government has done is locked up all gang members, cut the homicide rate dramatically, reduced it to almost nothing. But the human rights consequences are severe. There's no rule of law, there's no due process. People may get locked up who shouldn't be locked up. So the general point is you need proper systems of oversight if you take these harder core responses to organized crime. I think this is the crux of the discussion around organized crime now globally. It's the questions that I am having to answer, whether we are engaging in parliamentary committees or in private or public engagements, is, what do we need to do to reduce levels of organized crime? And our response is always independent law enforcement without corruption, what Chad has suggested, and South Africa has the capacity to achieve that. Secondly, reducing the incentives of organized crime, so reducing the recruitment of people within the organized crime economy. And yes, in periods in which you need to reduce organized crime, taking a set of stronger measures, the designation of criminal groups, for example, the arresting of key leaders. In most communities, key criminal actors, the crime bosses, are never arrested. It's more people at the bottom of the organized crime pyramid.
Well, how are we going to achieve that in South Africa if Chad is still in the private sector?
Listen,
what's your take on the efficiency, Chad, of like something like a state of emergency? You are mostly on the ground here. Would it in any way dismantle at least half of this organized crime activity?
Around the world, we've experienced year on year about a 40% increase in financial crime. Financial crime is not as well reported as one would expect. One believes that only 13% of financial crime is actually reported for a number of reasons. One of the reasons is no faith that there'll be an investigation, embarrassment, or no faith that there'll be restitution of funds, that they won't be able to recover the funds.
And they might spend a lot of money trying to chase the funds.
Last year, financial crime worldwide in terms of scams hits $1 trillion. It's a huge industry. Sextortion and pig butchering is huge in America now, huge in Europe, huge in the UK. The UK declared it a national security threat, financial crime. They released £150 million per annum, additional to the budget to employ 500 further fraud investigators. The US followed suit. They declared financial crime a national security threat, as has certain member states of the EU. South Africa, if you watch ENC and listen to Yusuf Abramji, he'll tell you there's a war against crime and we must win it. But there isn't an actual war against crime. If there was, you'd see a lot more collaborative efforts, multidisciplinary task teams, interagency takedowns. And we're getting there. We are getting there, but it's taking time. How can the Hawks function at 51% capacity? Seriously. How can the Hawks only get 2% budget, but you have VIP protection services get 3.5% of the police budget? We need to look at the priorities, and we need to look at declaring certain crimes a national security threat to open up those resources.
What would be your target of such crimes? I mean, what is a crime that should immediately be a target of being declared a national security threat?
So South Africa sits with the distinguish of being not just a target for financial crime, but we've got homegrown violent crime at all-time high levels. And we have to take those victims to heart. We need to look at GBV. We need to look at femicide. We need to look at murder. Those cases may not form part of what we've defined today as being organized crime, but it's a societal issue that really needs to be addressed, and it needs to be changed. It can't be changed by the police and the NPA. It has to be done collectively.
Have you noticed, I try to make this point in my other life. When it comes to murder, it's concentrated in terms of the numbers in like 30 police stations, which are always there. At least 15 of them just change a place like it's a league. Is that your sense on the one hand? And that means it's not really a problem across the country, but it's a problem of concentrated specific communities.
So there are some stations that have higher rates of certain crimes, but it's a problem throughout the country. I call it the Band-Aid approach. You have an area that has CITs, cash in transit heists, they'll send a unit there. When they believe they've stopped it, meanwhile it's moved to another area, they'll use those same members on ATM bombings. They then will use those same members on kidnapping, those same members on murder for hire. It's a Band-Aid approach because the crime just moves to other areas and it stays there. We need to come up with a medium to long-term approach. These short-term Band-Aids don't work.
This is Power Talk. We are still speaking to the question of organized crime. On the other side of the final hour of the show, we're going to zoom in to a much more dramatic crime associated, which is growing seriously here in South Africa, related to cyber security in the main. But stay tuned. We're going to take the news. It's 1100 hours with Nyakal Lodefu.
Stay informed. Power Talk with Mbuyiseni Ndlozi, 9 a.m. to midday on Power 98.7.
Welcome back, Bandana Benkosi. We are still talking to this question of organized crime, and we're going to zoom into South Africa. Very interesting parts here. There's this idea of hustle kingdoms, but before we go into it, I just want to push Chad this question of the resilience of South Africa to organized crime, and yet we score 7th in the world. And I wanted to push you about practically here in this country, and you were making a point offline about the number of cases that get reported, the number of cases that do get investigated, and that end up in the NPA and get convictions. That could be one of the measures of actually the fact that we are not resilient.
So apart from his hat, one of the things I remember about Bheki Cele was when he spoke to a parliamentarian who asked him a question about how many cases have been closed as undetected, and the figure was an unimaginable 5 million dockets. You can't make this stuff up. If you speak to the National Prosecuting Authority and you ask them what's their success rate in prosecutions, they're going to give you a double-digit figure. They're going to be very proud of that double-digit figure. It's going to be a fairly high double-digit figure. But when you look at the cases that were opened and the cases that actually resulted in prosecution, it tells a completely different story. Because most of the cases that are registered remain undetected, and the NPA will not enroll a docket unless they have a prospect of a successful prosecution. So if they tell you, for example, they have a 70% success rate in rape prosecutions in a certain area, what they may not tell you is that percentage of success is based on the dockets they enrolled. The majority of the dockets remained unenrolled because they were never solved by the detectives, because we've got a massive skill deficit within our detectives. So the true statistics are frightening. When you look at the amount of rapes that are actually registered. Now remember, a study at CALS at VIT showed that only 1 in 7 or 8 rapes are actually reported. So this statistics is even worse. But when you look at the number of rapes that are reported compared to the number of rapes that cases that result in successful prosecutions, the percentage is 5%. That means 95% of rape cases go unsolved. Murder, the most heinous of crimes, 10% of murders that are reported land up with a conviction. 10%. That means 9 out of 10 murderers walk amongst us. So we need to look at why we get skewed statistics. We need to understand why the state isn't being open and upfront with us. And we need a leadership from the state that takes us into their confidence, be it fireside chats once a week, like we had during COVID. But we need to understand that crime in South Africa is a massive problem. We rate as one of the worst in the world. And we need to do something about it, because this resilience is not going to last much longer. This resilience could lead to unimaginable consequences for our country when the citizens have too much and say enough is enough.
If you've just joined us, this is Power Talk. We are talking organized crime. Mark, what are hustle kingdoms? Just the basic 101 description. Hustle kingdoms.
They are basically cybercrime training academies, which are set up initially in Nigeria, Ghana to some extent, and they offer on and offline courses and blended learning. It's quite sophisticated, and they train people who are then drawn into the process of cybercrime. That's it in a nutshell.
When you say academies, I mean school?
Essentially, I mean, any institution, formal or informal, that trains or educates people in a particular practice, I think would be the case. And they are self-described academies that recruit people who can't access university, for example, in Nigeria, people often have parental support to enter a hustle academy, and there is some degree of fraud involved as well. People don't always know what they are getting into. There's some sense that they are going to be trading in forex trading or cybercrime, in cryptocurrency management, etc. But essentially, most people going in my opinion, know that they are entering such an academy. And when you look at the interview material of people who are there, there's a sense that they are partly legitimized. Fraud is seen as something where you're targeting ex-colonial powers, the rich people in the West, and that brings it a degree of legitimacy locally.
Okay, let's take it a bit easy because I do want to canvass that point with sufficient clarity. So what are some of the sort of, in practical terms, the scams that these academies train people for, and how prevalent really are they? For instance, here in South Africa, do we have these academies where Joburg, Cape Town? Please paint that for us.
When I was asked to come on the show, I checked with our researchers in South Africa, and they say there's some evidence in Cape Town of one or two which are West African linked, one potentially which is linked to folks of Pakistani origin. So there is a presence. I would make the argument that it's certainly not as strong as in Nigeria or Ghana or Southeast Asia. That's a different phenomenon, but I think it's part of the same overall development. The training is in essentially fraudulent activities, business compromise emails, romance fraud, 419 scams. I mean, none of this is there's a sophistication to it in terms of the preparation that is done. But in fact, what it really is basically deceiving people and building relationships over time and targeting people who may be particularly vulnerable.
And then an example of a romantic.
It's the classic is
you fall in love with someone online.
Yeah, you fall in love with someone online. And, the stories that have been reported to us, I'm sure Chad has, not only from South Africa, of course, and Chad has probably similar, is little old lady, she's lonely. There's a long-term development of a relationship. She pays out her accounts. The stories of people who then borrow money to pay additional money to the person. And it's very, very sophisticated, and it plays to people's emotions. Old people, I would say, are particularly vulnerable for a variety of reasons, are used to answering their phone, or less suspicious. So the individual costs for people who are vulnerable, I've mentioned, pensions and the like, can be extreme. And in really extreme cases, people are getting to severe debt, and they keep paying. They don't believe that it's a scam almost till the end, and they often don't report the scam. So individual harm in these cases can be enormous. Again, to make the point, there's a wide range of scams, paying of law firms, sort of intercepting emails, changing the bank account so that money is diverted to an alternative source. As many as you can think of, there are in this environment, and it really is on steroids.
Chad, my sense as I looked at the research is that there is actually a strong base in Cape Town, that Cape Town has become actually a hub for this type of crime. I don't know, but what's your South African picture?
South Africa has most definitely become a destination for transnational organized crime syndicates. The fact that we have a lot of English speakers who are unemployed, who are pretty learned, gives us a market of people to use in scams. So we have, let me break it down. We have a number of scams in South Africa that are people who are convinced to do it and people who are coerced into doing it. So when it comes to scam call centers, we all heard about the women and men who were lured to Thailand under the pretext that they were going to teach English there and then landed up in Myanmar, a neighboring country, running scam call centers. We have scam call centers in South Africa. We have them in Sandton. We have them in Century City and Cape Town. But those people are not trafficked. Those people know when they're going into that call center, they're assuming an alias, and they are defrauding other English-speaking countries. And they think that because there's little to no accountability or consequence, they're not going to be caught in South Africa. South Africa has been used by international crime syndicates as a springboard into English-speaking countries. So America, the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, New Zealand are targeted specifically by scam call centers set up in South Africa. Those call centers are taking
By who?
billions.
I mean, what would be the sort of nationality of the people who set up?
Israeli, Bulgarian, other Eastern European countries, not like people would think, Nigerian, West African, Far East. Those are other syndicates. Let's talk about the West Africans. They're operating in South Africa, the Nigerians specifically. There's 5 major groups in South Africa, 3 of which are very well known. They're called the Yahoo Boys, they're called Black Axe, they're called Viking, and then another 2 groups that are not that well known. They are advanced fee scammers. They bring people from Nigeria to South Africa. Those people are coming here willingly, they're participating, and they call their marker Mugu. And we've always heard the term Mugu. They've got Mugu. That's what they call the person that they're targeting. And like Mark pointed out, they could say that the person's greedy because they're saying, I'm the widow of the late Gaddafi. I've got $100 million that needs to be cleaned somehow. I need a legitimate businessman to be able to clean that money for me. And then it becomes an advance fee fraud. It means that you now have to pay for a bank account to be opened. You have to pay for the funds to be moved. You have to pay for the funds to be cleaned. You have to pay for the security. It's an extension of a whole lot of scams, whether it's a black dollar scam, whether it's a coltan scam. It's just an extension of those scams. And that's particularly perturbing because it's targeting South Africans as well. It's targeting people overseas. And it leads us to our third crime. We've got the third crime where we have sextortion locally, which is an extension of a romance scam, and then we have sextortion internationally. The local syndicate we found that was operating on WhatsApp was actually South African. It was homegrown. It was youngsters from Guyana that were running that syndicate. But when it comes to sextortion in America, that are targeting teenagers on social media, there's been dozens of reported suicides amongst these young Americans. We're finding that, again, it's Yahoo Boys, it's Black Axe, it's Vikings, it's some of these West African groups that are operating out of South Africa, targeting foreign nationals. And we're now seeing that advance fee fraud is actually leading to death.
But hustle kingdoms, what Mark has described as these academies where there's training in basically being a fraudster. Do we have these in South Africa? And I mean, the claim here is Cape Town is a hub for these types of academies.
So
how true is that?
So we need to define academy. So are people being taught to do it and they're going there knowingly because they want to know how to scam? Or are people being offered job opportunities, realizing it's a scam and then carrying on with it? And it's more towards the second. People are answering advertisements to work in call centers. When they go into that call center, they get told, you have to assume an alias. So it's a very generic name like Michael Clifford. It sounds like a very English name. It's a generic name. It's not that person's name. So the person should be immediately suspicious. And then they get given scripts. And they have to learn those scripts. And those scripts are how to sell non-existent products, how to compromise somebody's email, how to take control over their bank accounts. And it even has hard-hitting answers. So if somebody doesn't want to respond positively, that's your mark, they give you scripts on how to respond. So we do have these academies, but whether those academies are people that have gone out looking to learn or by chance have fallen into that because they're looking for a job, that is where it's a little bit undecided in terms of how these academies are operating.
If you've just joined us, this is Power Talk with me, Mbuyiseni Ndlozi. We're going to take your calls to interact with our guest here online. Our studio line is 0861987000. I've got Mark Shaw, Director of the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime, and Chad Thomas, who is Organized Crime Investigator at IRS Forensic Investigations. If you want to ask questions, maybe also share your own thoughts, call us on 0861 987 000. I don't know between the two of you, Mark. There's this story of Belle Gibson, the Australian lady. I don't know if you know it. Who was an Instagram sensation that argued that she had brain cancer and was self-healing and basically scammed as high organizations as Apple. Released the book with Penguin, a cooking book, because she was canvassing recipes and all of that about eating properly, and but she had gotten so much sympathy in the world because of the claim that she had a brain cancer. What is that? Is that part of what kind of a scam? How do you categorize that kind, and how prevalent is it? Mark?
I think what's happened, of course, is that the platform of social media and the reach that it provides to millions, if not billions of people, enables that. I think that's a scam. It's fraud. It's not true. You are using people's sympathy for you to attract finances over time. And the same, although the frauds are so diverse, the principles are very, very similar. It's about deception. It's about building relationships of trust. And then it's about extracting resources, as Chad has described very well. And in all cases, what you are doing is building forms of sympathy, forms of legitimacy for what you are doing, forms of trust, which allows you then to extract funds. So in my view, that's part of it. It's different in that sounds like an individual who has done that over time, and it's very much their operation. What we've been talking about here, either Southeast Asia or the cases in South Africa or in West Africa, is systematic training of people with very complicated playbooks, again, as Chad has described, which is then reaching out, trying to draw in victims and doing that almost on an industrial scale.
Okay, we had a big show, well, not a big show, a big focus on the show about the abuse of the elderly. And there's an organization mostly coming from Cape Town that, advocates for elderly care, elderly rights and all of that. And part of what they described, because of the advancement in digital technologies, old people become a sort of systemic target of online banking fraud. And I'm speaking here, for instance, a couple, one is 82, the other is 90, go on an ATM, put a card, and it looks blocked for a couple of minutes. When it comes back, 7,000 gone. Would this be something that these academies or organized syndicates do, and how really prevalent is it?
Okay, so there's two kinds of crimes that you're discussing here. The one is card skimming and the other is actual card swapping. That's been around for a very long time in South Africa, and it is the most vulnerable of society that get taken because they're not that clued up with technology. They don't know what to do in that kind of situation, and they get harassed. So an elderly person, not even an elderly person, anybody could put their card into an ATM, but that card slot has been jimmied. In other words, it's been manipulated so that the card gets stuck. And the fraudsters know how to take the card out. The fraudsters are standing nearby. They're hovering. They see what kind of card the person's taken out of their wallet. They've got a whole array of cards. So they find a card that looks the most similar. The minute the person's card is stuck, this person will rush over with the pretense to help them, and they will swap their card out. They've already seen the person putting in the PIN. They've heard the PIN being put in. And what they do is they pass that card on to another person who goes to another ATM in that mall or wherever the case may be, and they start drawing the person's daily limit because they now have the card in their possession. They have the PIN code, while the person who swapped the card is still speaking to that elderly person, pretending to get the bank on the line, saying that the machine has swallowed your card. The other syndicates we had operate, so yes, people could be trained in that. Most definitely, I believe people could go learn how to swap out cards at an ATM. The other, of course, was an Eastern European syndicate that operated in South Africa about a decade ago. They were primarily in upmarket restaurants. They would target the waitrons, as you now call waitresses and waitresses, waitrons, and they would corrupt these individuals, compromise them, and they would have a skimming device in their moonbag. So you would give your card across so that your card could be swiped. They would see what your PIN code is. Without your knowledge, when they're giving your card back, they're skimming it. Or they have some way of downloading the information from the magnetic strip. And that syndicate was selling those card details abroad. So those people had to be trained in it. But again, were they willing participants? Did they know that they were going to be committing fraud? And you know what? That's the question in South Africa. Have we reached a point where we think of crime as non-violent, it's okay to do it? Let's look at those gorgos again. You have a youngster that leaves the village. He comes back in a convertible BMW. He tells people that he's become an expert in Forex. He goes after all the Stokvel money in the community. He takes all the gorgos' pensions. He disappears back to the city. He lives La Vida Loca. He goes to the casinos. He stays in a 5-star hotel. Was it a violent crime? It can become a violent crime. People can take their own lives. But they gave him a chance. He took advantage of them, and he thought, well, I'm not hurting them. I'm just taking their money.
And then, I mean, in this case, you're pointing it out that the attitude in the country would be to think that's of a lesser degree because he didn't sort of kidnap them, tie them, force them to do this and that. And that attitude often leads to the fact that we just happen to accept it and move on. It doesn't get investigated.
So, Doc, to your point, we have a crime syndicate that has emerged specifically in the Eastern Cape, targeting black retired women that worked in the public sector. So they may be retired nurses, retired teachers, even retired policewomen. These people know that these women are either widowed or spinsters. They're single. They may not have family. They know when the government pension is paying out. They know how much is available. They are knocking on these women's doors, demanding half of that money with the implied threat of violence, rape, or murder. And they're walking away with half that woman's pension, and she's transferring it to a bank account. There's a hot trail there that if the police have to follow that syndicate, they can find, providing it's not a mule account, they can find the perpetrators of that crime. So South Africa has become too desensitized, and the most vulnerable in society are being targeted.
It's 11:30 here on Power Talk. We're going to conclude the conversation on the other side and focusing specifically on how do we combat some of these cyber scams and cyber crimes and cyber syndicates. What could the police do, particularly thinking of where in the world are they getting it right? It's 11:30. We're going to take the headlines with Nyakalotefu.
Stay informed. Power Talk with Mbuyiseni Ndlozi, 9 a.m. to midday on Power 98.7.
We're speaking organized crime here on Power Talk. If you want to ask any questions, 0861987000, you are welcome to interact with our guest. Before I go back to you, Mark, I just wanted to give Chad an opportunity to describe for us, paid for us, because they say some of these hustler kingdoms / academies of training fraudsters, digital scammers and all of that will actually even hold a graduation. How true is that, and can you paint it for us? What would be happening?
It's become a way of life, especially for our West African, let's call it what it is, Nigerian syndicates, like the Yahoo Boys, like the Vikings, like the Black Axe. People want to be a part of it. They see people that have entered into that world. They see how well they've done. A lot of them have come to South Africa. They've made millions. They've gone back to Lagos. They've gone back to Abuja. They've gone back to their various villages, and they are exceptionally wealthy. And they don't hide the fact that they've been targeting, as they term it, mugus. They've been targeting people and taking money from them. So people want to become a part of this. So they are recruited. It's almost a cult-like environment. They're recruited into this. They have to take an oath, almost like the Omerta that the Cosa Nostra takes. You have these different syndicates taking an oath. They get trained, and they even have a party to celebrate. One could call it a graduation of sorts.
How does that happen? Like a physical party?
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of these are not just online. A lot of them are in person. What you'll find is people want to bring their homeboys to South Africa. So they want to get them trained in Nigeria and then brought to Hillbrow, Sunnyside, or Somerset West in the Cape, or the Strand. They want them prepared. They don't want to have to sit them into a boiler room and have them trained up. They want them trained already. So when they bring their homeboys to South Africa, they've already gone through the training process and, in inverted commas, graduated.
So, Mark, what are some of the strategies? I mean, I'm speaking here to combat specifically this hustler kingdom phenomena. What should the police be doing that they are not doing, or the authorities in general?
Mbuyiseni, I think there's really three things. There's a preventative side to this, and that, in my view, is much more about educating people about particularly vulnerable groups. We've spoken about the elderly, but everybody to some degree is vulnerable. So people are just wiser, I think, about some of the scams that are running. I think many people are wise to this. I'm still surprised that people reply to 419 mails, frankly, but just this idea that there's a lot of danger in doing so. The second issue is social. And, I have worked over the years in Nigeria. It's a country I really like. And one of the issues is that there's enormous entrepreneurial talent in Nigeria, and people are recruited because education has become very expensive. And I think the research that in Nigeria shows that actually a lot of people entering hustle kingdoms, I think this is slightly different in South Africa, as Chad has pointed out, actually only have primary school education. They don't have the resources to go to university. The first 419 scams were people emerging from Nigerian universities, and indeed the Black Axe, these big clan groups, their roots are in university fraternities. So this linkage between education, space in the economy, entrepreneurship, are I think all part of the question. So there's a lot of work to do in Nigeria from a prevention side. In the context of South Africa and the drawing in of South Africans into the economy, frankly, enforcement can only do so much. And what is required is to create viable economic opportunities for a particular category of people who as Chad has outlined very well, are defrauded or think they're going into some other kind of activity and then essentially get trapped. On the enforcement side, we have to do much better. And I think globally, our experience is that reporting levels are quite poor. So people are embarrassed when they are defrauded. So they are unlikely to report. It gets picked up in victim surveys. When it is reported, the police, because there's an enormous number of cases, don't take it seriously. So what is required is much more proactive targeting of the hubs where the scam centers may be, where the training academies may be. There have been some success in conjunction with the US authorities against Black Axe in South Africa. A lot of that stuff has to continue if we are to make real progress. There is some success around the world, notably in the Myanmar, Cambodia sort of cluster. I know this isn't precisely what we're talking about, but Chad made an important point about the degree to which English-speaking countries and individuals with education are sought after. That's why South Africans have been recruited in the Thailand cases. And I think highlighting to people to really check out offers closely, to understand and get a sense the degree to which there's a large amount of fraudulent opportunities. And often, if it sounds too good to be true, it is too good to be true.
Could this digital nomad visa, what would it be? What would be its impact in the sort of increase of cybercrime or these organized hustler kingdoms? Do you think it will have a negative impact?
I think if we're talking to the movement of persons, if it's going to make it easier, we're going to see a lot more trafficking. And we need to be very clear when we talk about trafficking in persons, what it actually means. A lot of people are trafficked voluntarily because they're coming to South Africa for opportunities. We call them economic refugees, whether they're from Bangladesh, from Pakistan, from Malawi, wherever the case may be. They're coming here, and they're coming here undocumented so that they can make money in South Africa to send back home. Because they are vulnerable, because they are undocumented, they get taken advantage of. Even those that are documented get taken advantage of. Take, for example, in the 90s when we had an explosion of Thai brothels and strip clubs with Ukrainian girls. Those girls would be lured to South Africa. Some of them knew they were coming here to dance or they were coming here to be prostitutes, but their passports were confiscated the minute they landed in South Africa. The promise of how much they would be made changed completely. They now owed the syndicate, the organized crime traffickers, money, and the traffickers knew who their family was overseas. So if they came from a small town in Ukraine or from a village in Thailand, their families would be threatened. They would have to now be working under duress to make money to pay back to the organized crime figures. South Africa, we've seen people come across from Mozambique that are used for forced slave labor on farms. We've seen a garment factory where people were locked in at night, had to sleep under the sewing machines, and forced to work there as well. So trafficking in persons isn't just for the sex trade. It isn't just for mules in narcotics. It's also people that are coming voluntarily and are then exploited because they're looking for an opportunity to make money to send home.
Let me take a caller and then a voice note after. There's an interesting question here. Victor in Mpumalanga, welcome to Power Talk.
Hello, good morning, Ndlozi. How are you?
I'm fine, brother. 30 seconds, heat.
I appreciate your program this morning. It's a very, very nice highlight for the parliament of this country, because this crime is limiting our freedom, you know.
Yeah.
And then our police are not capable of doing their job properly to prevent crime and even to control it. I hope this message is a well organized message that you are presenting today. Thank you.
Do you have a question, though?
Yes, I still have a question, because I've opened many cases of theft that they are even closed without tracing. They can't detect those wildlife lost, you see. Even now, recently, on the 20th of March, they took my 18 cattle away. House robbery was involved there.
Okay.
And another person, other side, they took 20 cattle of him, and another old woman, he jumped out of the window.
No,
so
we'll
there's no visibility of police around this area.
Thank you.
So I engaged the NMC, even the Mpumalanga Premier.
Yeah. No, thank you, Victor. I'm going to put it to our panel here on Power Talk. Stock theft syndicates. Let's talk about that. But the voice note first.
Hi, Doc. It's X here from Olympus in Tshwane. I'd like to find out from your guest if it's possible for a fraudulent activity to happen on your account if the person only has your ID and your ID number rather and your bank name.
What is a bank? Oh, it's a voice. Okay. Yeah, Chad, I'm going to come to you first. Stock theft. Big problem in the rural areas, and I think it's pretty organized.
It is organized, especially if you live near the borders of Lesotho, where you do have Basotho people coming over the border and raiding different farms of their livestock. We have a cattle theft unit, which is a specific unit within the South African Police Service that is tasked with these kinds of investigations. They have made successes, but again, rural areas, widespread, not enough policing numbers. So it's an ongoing crime, and it's a deplorable crime because, again, it's the most vulnerable that have been targeted. If you listen to the gent that was on and the people he spoke about, the victimology of them, they're elderly people, and this is their life that's been taken from them.
And I mean, okay, so if I don't know if you've heard of it, but there's a guy who was saying they've got an app that could basically GPS track, or on the other hand, it was a different app about if there are many cows here, it's able to identify that this is the cow that belonged to Mbuyiseni. I don't know if you've heard like how digital technologies are now at the disposal, but the police are not using them to sort of surveil on the one hand, but also to recover the cattle?
So our police service, our border management authority and other law enforcement agencies are beginning to make use of technology. We're seeing the use of drones. We're seeing the use of technology in the Western Cape, especially in gang areas, where they can determine when a gunshot is fired and where that gun was fired in proximity. And there's a lot of devices that can be used. And of course, you can tag cattle and you'll be able to find them whether they're slaughtered or not by that stage. But it comes down to embracing technology. We are in this fourth industrial revolution. We have a president that's waxed lyrically about moving with the times.
Wax lyrically.
But we don't see it happening on the ground. We need to capacitate our police officers. We need to train them up in the use of technology. We need to use technology to fight crime because criminals are adept at technology. And right now, they're not a step ahead. They're about 250 steps ahead of us.
Ahead of the authorities, you mean?
Yep.
Mark, the illicit financial flows centers. President Mbeki recently visited the Vatican City, and he wanted to make a case that illicit financial flows should be declared as a sin. But at the center of them are your tax havens, as it were. And I mean, the international effort to declare tax havens as criminal spaces. How far is that offered, if any?
Look, the first point to make is that there's still billions of illicit money moving around the world from all of the markets that we have referred to. A lot of what's happened, of course, is under the FATF. You know well that South Africa's been on the grey list, for example, that there are real efforts to try and curb this. But at the same time, there are advances in this area which mean that there are new opportunities emerging. The new fintech sector in Asia, I think, is a legitimate worry. That's where the money is laundered from the scam centers that we've touched on earlier in Southeast Asia. There's an industry of money laundering specialists. Cryptocurrency itself has been a kind of game changer for the illicit economy. We should say it like it is, because that's, I think, the reality. You can hide through a process of, yes, you can trace crypto on the blockchain, but there are very sophisticated ways through tumblers where you can also hide it. So a lot of work is being done. You've talked about technology, but technology and the incentives for people to keep ahead of enforcement remain. And I think we are not close to curbing some of the movement of illicit money. I do want to make one general point, though, is that the tax havens were created as platforms for people to hide from the tax authorities, but they then began to be used by drug traffickers, cartel heads, and the others. That is true of many of the innovations in fintech and elsewhere. People want to put their money in places where the tax authorities can't see, and then people invest in cryptocurrency to make money. But cryptocurrency is a key way, including for Nigerian syndicates in South Africa, to move their money and to hide their money from the authorities.
Yeah, but I mean, is there an international effort to declare tax havens illegal, like to have a sort of international agreement that these are just criminal places? I mean,
yes,
Africa on the extractive industries, I mean, they lose $250 billion annually, $1 trillion, in fact, annually to illicit financial flows. And this is facilitated solely through tax havens.
It's correct. I think the current efforts underway to reduce tax havens have gone far, but there are still spaces within the global system where you can hide your money, in my view. So it is partly the business model of some places. We've touched on one or two, so my view is that those will never quite be closed, but there's a lot of efforts underway, I think. But there's some reversal, I think, in some of the discussions in around cryptocurrency, tax havens, and the like. So that the openings for illicit money remain.
I see. And then, Chad, final question. The state, you mentioned two weaknesses, as it were, in the South African police: detective services on the one hand, and crime intelligence. That's within the SAPS, but isn't that also the case with state security itself? What would be your assessment of cyber crime combating units? I mean, are we in any of these? I mean, do we have detectives that are able digitally to chase criminals? I mean, with the fourth industrial revolution at hand, on the one hand, and also like just within the crime intelligence capabilities, I mean, particularly state security, what is the skill set there? What is the state of the skill set?
So our state security agency, which is about to be disbanded and reformed into two separate agencies, should be playing a vital role in respect of crime being declared a national security threat. They should be capacitating and assisting in being proactive and identifying these syndicates, and then having what we call disruptive and dismantling operations taking place. SAP's crime intelligence at the moment is also being restructured. There's a lot of fallout from the past when one looks at people like General Ndlozi, who gave a already paranoid president the ground coverage report that made him even more paranoid. General Joey Mabaso, who was linked to Radovan Krejcir through his wife. This has never boded well for intelligence. We've seen that intelligence has been used rather for political advancement and to settle squabbles. Now they're going through a change. Now we're seeing, like I mentioned earlier in the show, that they're creating specialized units within crime intelligence to combat crime, to disrupt and dismantle these organized crime syndicates, which is great. They've also got a cyber component, but it's few and far between. The private sector has far more money than the public sector. So if you're a cyber specialist, it would be great to work for the state to get the experience, but you're going to get poached into the private sector in any case. So people aren't there for the long term. They need to make it attractive for people to come back into the police or to join the police that are vocationally orientated, that want to make a difference, not just a job. So we have capacity, but very limited. We have specialists, but very limited. When I speak about we, I speak about the state collectively, because we, the people, are meant to be protected by the state. So the state has this limited capacity that they need to expand upon. And like I mentioned as well earlier in the show, you can't have the Hawks as the Priority Crime Investigation Unit operating at 51% capacity. It makes no sense. The money is available. The budgets are just not being adequately defined. How does, and I ask you this again with tears in my navy blue eyes, how does VIP protection and security services get more money than the priority crime investigation? It doesn't make sense.
I didn't notice until now that you had navy blue eyes. This like sort of crime intelligence in South Africa seems very compromised, or rather embedded. I mean the SAPS one in this case, because it seems to me there is a coordinated network, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong. This is the last point I will canvass, it's almost over, between izinkabi, or the assassins in South Africa, correctional service, and crime intelligence. Of course, I'm thinking here Makaka's case is a point in example, but there are also suspicions with the high-profile assassinations of DJ Somebody, possibly in the case as well of AKA. Those networks, to what extent are they prevalent? Are these Nkabis embedded in that sense?
Yeah, so the Izinkabis are a very interesting dynamic. A lot of them originated in KwaZulu-Natal. You saw taxi bosses wanting to have their own hit squads to be able to take out rivals. And then they realized they can monetize this. This can become a new business. You can now hire out your crew of Izinkabi to go settle business squabbles. It's easier to settle a business squabble through a bullet than to wait for a court case for 5 years down the line. So we now see security companies being purchased by bad actors because it gives them access to legitimate weapons. It means they can drive on a freeway with flashing white lights, with firearms that the police aren't going to necessarily stop. And if the police are complicit, they may even give them an escort to be able to take out people. we are on a watching brief for the DJ Somebody family. We are assisting them at the moment in that particular investigation. We're also on a watching brief for the Pena family, where Marumo Pena, who was a Department of Home Affairs official, or rather he was a Home Official supplier, blew the whistle on massive corruption within that department. And it's sad because we've identified who the top tier leadership was that ordered these hits, yet it's the foot soldiers that get prosecuted. And the foot soldiers won't say who it is that hired them because they get looked after in prison, their families get looked after outside. And we have seen that there's a symbiotic relationship between bad actors in the public sector and bad actors in the private sector because it's all money driven. And we've become such a money obsessed society that it has to be addressed. That's why I said to you earlier, crime in South Africa is societal. If we don't address the societal issues of it, we're not going to get to the undercurrent and the underbelly of it.
Final question, Mark, and it's related to this activity of assassins in South Africa. How is prevalent, or rather pain for us, the smuggling of weapons in relation to South Africa? Is that still on a high level, or I mean, during apartheid it was a big thing, but is the smuggling of weapons in South Africa a huge matter? And how much of that goes into criminal activities that of the nature that Chad is speaking to?
Cindy, I've looked at this over the years for a variety of reasons, and just a couple of points. Firstly, flows of guns from the north of us still occur, but are much reduced.
Okay.
Second point to make is that in my interviews with gang bosses, etc., in South Africa, they are looking for bulk guns. Where do you get bulk guns? Very often from state sources. So the infamous, notorious Prinsloo case of thousands of guns, which were meant to be destroyed, then transported and bought by the gangs, which has a direct impact on the homicide rates. And then, of course, guns that are stolen from individual holders and then make their way into the illicit economy. Guns are absolutely critical part of the underworld because guns give you power. So when we are talking about mafia-like organizations, in the past, gangs may hold a limited number of firearms, issue them out to their members, and then they had to be returned on pain of death. Now, every junior gangster has a firearm or more than one. So there's the degree to which firearms have become an absolutely key part of the violence linked to organized crime in South Africa, I think is a key issue to understand. And targeting the illicit firearm economy in South Africa has to be one of the solutions.
Okay, that brings us to the end of the show. That was Mark Shaw, Director of Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime. Thank you so much, Mark, for creating the time. And I wonder, what are you doing in Austria there? You live in Austria now?
I do, because we're a global organization. So one of our headquarters is here, and I'm here at the moment, Mbuyiseni. But I'm South African, as you know.
Yeah, I can hear it. Thank you very much for joining us. Chad Thomas, Organized Crime Investigator and IRS Forensic Investigations. What is IRS?
IRS was Integrated Risk Solutions, became a standalone brand in 2011, and we investigate complex financial crime.
I see. But thanks very much, Chad,
for
honoring us with your time. It's it from us here at Power Talk. You can stay tuned for Power Lunch with Pa B Moloyi, who serves the best lunch in town. From us here at Power Talk, Ndintanda Nonke Makaya.